They sent me the minutes. That's the part people don't believe. Not a letter, not a demand, minutes. 3 pages, stapled, on association letterhead, with the roll call typed out in a neat little table. Motion to abate the hazardous structure on the adjoining parcel. Moved, seconded, discussed. 9 in favor, none opposed. And across the top in green ink, the logo, a round barn in silhouette, because the subdivision is called Round Barn Farms, and the barn on their letterhead was mine. My name is Owen Sarkis. I'm 54, and for 23 years I have taken buildings down for a living. I'm a demolition engineer. I write the sequence, I pull the permits, I order the surveys, I schedule the abatement, and then I stand across the street with a radio and watch something big stop existing. I have dropped a hospital wing. I know precisely what it takes, on paper, in this state, to legally destroy a structure built in 1903. It takes 4 months and 11 signatures. It took them 90 minutes and 1 excavator. The barn came with the farm, and the farm came with my mother's family. And when I bought out my brother's half 11 years ago, I did it for the barn, which is not a rational thing to say out loud. It was a true round barn, not polygonal, round, one of the last whole ones in the county. Indiana had over 200 of them once. There are fewer than 100 now, maybe a dozen you could call intact, and mine was one, and I spent 11 years and a great deal of money making that sentence true. Here's why a barn like that is worth a man's decade. There's no interior frame. A round barn holds itself up. The whole ring is the structure, every timber leaning on the ones beside it, a self-carrying circle. And the men who built it in 1903 cut and fitted the entire frame flat on the ground before they ever raised it, which means they had to number the joints. Every principal timber carried a Roman numeral chiseled into the face, 1 through 36 around the ring, so the raising crew would know which piece married which. You could still read them. You could put your thumb in a mark a man made with a chisel 120 years ago because he needed to keep track of his own work. I restored 35 of 36 bays. Sills, siding, silo core, doors, cupola. 11 years. The only thing I never finished was the roof. The roof was transit, corrugated asbestos cement panel, installed in 1954 by a man who thought he was doing the barn a favor, and by the standards of 1954 he was. I had it surveyed 2 years ago. The report is in the filing cabinet in my office. Positive, chrysotile, non-friable in place, which means entirely safe, indefinitely, as long as nobody breaks it. You want to know why the asbestos guy's own roof stayed up 11 years? Because doing it right takes a licensed abatement contractor, a state notification, a containment plan, and a spot in line. And the good crews here are booked out about 11 months. I was in that line. I'd been in it twice. I could have hired a man with a truck to rip it off in a weekend for $600, and every professional instinct I own said, wait, do it correctly. It's been up there 70 years. It can wait 11 more months. So it waited. Then Round Barn Farms went in on the west line, 140 houses on what used to be the demo place, and they named it after my barn. There's an entrance monument on the county road with the silhouette carved into limestone. They put it on the letterhead. They put it on the pool towels. 2 years after that, the minutes arrived. I drove to their next meeting. I did not yell, because I have never once seen yelling accomplish anything except make the other party feel morally excellent about ignoring you. I brought my deed and the parcel map and asked one question. Under what authority? Roberta Halloran answered me, and she answered pleasantly. And she had a slide. Bobby Halloran was 59 and had spent 30 years as a corporate risk manager, a job where you are paid to walk into a room and find the thing that's going to get everybody sued. 3 decades of looking at the world and seeing only exposure, and what she saw across her fence wasn't a barn. It was an attractive nuisance, a big derelict-looking structure that neighborhood kids climb, and one day a kid falls, and there's a lawsuit and a dead child, and everyone asks why nobody did anything. I want to be fair to her. She wasn't stupid and she wasn't crooked. She was right about the kids. Kids did climb it. I'd run them off myself. She explained the board's duty to the community. She used the phrase, unacceptable liability posture, which I have since had time to appreciate as poetry. And when I said this was my property and she had no authority over 1 square inch of it, she gave me the sentence I'll hear for the rest of my life. Mr. Sarkis, she said, we're not asking you, we're informing you. So I informed her back, and this is the part I regret. I got professional at her. I stood in that clubhouse and read the checklist out loud like she was a client, because I honestly believed that if she understood the process, she'd understand the size of what she was proposing. Demolition permit, asbestos survey, mandatory, federal, any structure built before 1980. State notification 10 working days out. Licensed abatement contractor, wet removal, sealed and manifested waste, utility disconnects. Licensed demolition contractor, bonded, 11 signatures, 4 months, $60,000 to $80,000. Nobody in that room moved except one man in the 3rd row, a retiree named Dale Wickham, who had brought a legal pad and who at some point during my recitation stopped writing on it and started looking at the carpet. He was still looking at the carpet when I left. I noticed it the way you notice weather, and Bobby Halloran looked at me across that clubhouse, kindly, I swear, and said, "We have a board resolution." That's when I understood this wasn't going where I thought. I'd walked in assuming ignorance, and ignorance is curable. What she had was a religion, that a decision, properly minuted, moved by an authorized body, is a real thing in the world. In her life, a vote was a load-bearing object. 30 years, and she'd never personally met a consequence a corporation didn't absorb for her. She could not conceive of a universe in which 9 people vote unanimously and the answer is no. That isn't a thing you're permitted to want. So I did everything correctly. This is the part that costs me sleep. I filed for local landmark designation the next morning. It's the strongest move on the board. In this county, a pending designation triggers an automatic moratorium. Nobody demolishes the subject property while it's under review. And the county doesn't just file it in a drawer. They send certified notice to every adjoining owner, which meant the Round Barn Farms Homeowners Association received and signed for a letter from their government stating in plain English that the structure next door was protected from demolition. They signed the green card on a Thursday. I have a copy of the signature. I sent a cease and desist, certified. Nothing came back. That nothing was my only warning, and I read it exactly wrong. I read it as a lawyer telling a client to stop talking. It was a lawyer telling a client to hurry. Because here's the thing about a moratorium. It's a prohibition, not a bodyguard. It tells you that you may not. It does not put anybody on your lane. A moratorium gets enforced afterward, by fines, by a citation, by a county attorney with a caseload. And afterward is a lovely word if the thing you're protecting is still standing when afterward arrives. What I wanted was an order with a judge's name on it and contempt attached, the kind you hand to a sheriff's deputy while the machine is still on the trailer. I filed for a temporary restraining order Friday, hearing set for Tuesday, 9 in the morning. Tuesday, I put on a tie. The judge signed at 9:40. It's a good order. I still have it. It prohibits the Round Barn Farms Homeowners Association, its officers, agents, and contractors from entering my parcel or damaging, altering, or removing any structure thereon. At 8:15 that morning, while I was in the parking garage of the courthouse 2 miles away, a tracked excavator came up my lane. They went at the roof first, which is what an amateur does. You start high. And which was, on that particular building, the single worst place to start, for 2 entirely separate reasons. The first is structural. A round barn is a hoop. It has no spine. The roof is the top cord that keeps the ring from spreading, and when you break it, the whole circle loses its argument with gravity all at once. That barn didn't come down in pieces. The operator hit the eave line, the ring went slack, and 120 years of self-supporting geometry folded straight into itself, inward, all 36 bays in about 4 seconds. Everything those men built to hold each other up let go together. It was, according to a neighbor's video, extremely fast and almost silent. The second reason is that the roof was transit, 90 minutes start to finish. And then a second crew came in behind the excavator with a flatbed and a skid steer, and they worked that pile for about an hour, and they were not cleaning it up, they were shopping. They pulled 36 pieces out of the wreck, the principal timbers, the hand-hewn 11 by 11s, the only part of a barn that has a market, and chained them down and drove them out, and left absolutely everything else. Siding, purlins, cupola, silo staves, 70 years of shattered asbestos panel, a low tangled ring of trash where a building had been. I got there at 10:20 with the signed order in my hand. There's dust when a building comes down, always. It hangs. There was a white haze standing over my property in the morning air, drifting slow and steady to the northwest, which meant it was drifting over the fence, into Round Barn Farms. I didn't say anything. I didn't shout at the operator, who was sitting on the tracks eating a sandwich, and who, I want to note, had been told this was a permitted job. I got out of the truck, took out my phone, and started filming the dust. 23 years will do that to you. 23 years of document first, feel later, I stood in the wreck of 11 years of my life and ran a plume survey with a cell phone, because it was the only useful thing I could physically do, and because if I put the phone down, I would have had to be a person instead. The deputy came out around 11, looked at the pile, looked at my court order, and said what deputies say, that this appeared to be a civil matter and I should speak with an attorney. I didn't argue. I've learned not to argue with a man telling the truth about the limits of his job. I made a different call, because in 90 minutes on a Tuesday, Bobby Halloran, 30-year risk professional, had ordered the dry demolition of a pre-1980 structure with no survey, no notification, no licensed abatement, no wetting, no containment. That isn't a county matter. The emission standard is federal. The survey requirement is federal. And the fact that the material was harmless while it sat on my rafters and became regulated the instant her excavator turned it into powder is exactly, precisely the point of the rule. They couldn't claim they didn't know either, because I had the survey. Paid for it 2 years earlier. Chrysotile, positive, 1954 transite. The document that kept me from finishing my roof for 11 months at a stretch became the document that turned their weekend job into a federal case. That pile couldn't go to a landfill. It was regulated asbestos-containing waste, and moving it required a licensed contractor, a manifest, and a permitted disposal site, which meant the remains of my barn sat in my field for 4 months, getting more expensive every day, like a body they couldn't get out of the living room. And the dust went north. It settled on Round Barn Farms, on the pool furniture, the cars, and, because the geometry of the world has no sense of restraint, on the playground on the common green. The playground with the children on it. The children whose safety was the entire justification for the vote. A woman who spent 30 years eliminating risk to children personally ordered an operation that dusted a playground with asbestos. Nobody was hurt. One outdoor plume is not a factory, but they had to test and close the green for 6 weeks and pay a consultant to sample soil and put up the orange fencing and mail a letter to every family in that subdivision. Not one of those letters had a round barn on the letterhead. Somebody had finally figured out how that would look. Now, nobody in that association ever confessed anything to me, and nothing in this next part was luck. 36 hand-hewn white oak timbers do not evaporate. I've been in this trade 23 years, and reclaim is the adjacent trade. Every demo job I've ever run has had a salvage broker circling it like a gull, because the wood in an old barn is worth more than the barn, and everybody in the business knows it. So on the drive home from a pile in my own field, I already knew what had happened to my beams, and I knew there were maybe 9 brokers in the Midwest who move that grade of material, and I started calling them Wednesday morning. It took 6 weeks. On the 4th call to the 5th broker, a young man got helpful and mentioned a place in Ohio with a fresh Indiana lot. I drove 3.5 hours and walked in like a customer because I am a 54-year-old man in a canvas jacket and I look exactly like a person who wants to make a mantle out of somebody else's history. They had a rack of it, beautiful stuff, standing on end under track lighting with little tags hanging off it like suits. Hand-hewn white oak circa 1900, Indiana. $400 per linear foot. I walked the rack, third from the end at eye level on the face of a beam 11 inches by 11, a chisel mark, Roman numeral, 23. 23 of 36. I stood there and put my thumb in it, the way I'd put my thumb in it 1,000 times, and did not make a sound. A young man in a polo shirt 15 feet away asked if I had a project in mind. They hadn't destroyed my barn, they'd harvested it, which reframed everything, because it reframes the crime. Destroying property is one thing, taking property and selling it is conversion. And because it answered the question that had been eating me since the minutes arrived. Why does a homeowners association take on this much exposure over a building it doesn't own? Liability panic doesn't pay for an excavator. Reclaimed hand-hewn timber does. I made no scene. I took 9 photographs of the tag and the numeral and left. Then my lawyer subpoenaed the dealer's paperwork, and the dealer, not a villain, a legitimate businessman with a checkbook and a bill of sale, and an expression of pure horror when he learned where his rack came from, and a worse one when he learned what had been raining on it, handed over the contract. The salvage agreement between the association and the broker was dated 3 weeks before the vote. 3 weeks before the vote. They sold my barn, and then held a meeting to decide whether to demolish it. The 9-0 was a reenactment. The money, for the record, went to the association. Every cent. I've seen the deposit. It paid down a special assessment for the pool resurfacing, and I have thought about that more than is healthy. That Bobby Halloran took a 120-year-old landmark off the face of Indiana and spent it on a swimming pool, and that in her own mind, this was not theft, but prudent stewardship. A liability eliminated and a reserve fund improved. 2 boxes ticked in one Tuesday. And Discovery gave up one more thing. One email sent at 7:40 Monday evening from the association's own attorney to Bobby Halloran. I've read it maybe 200 times. TRO hearing is Tuesday, 9 a.m. If the structure is already gone, there's nothing to restrain. That's the whole story in 14 words. They didn't take my barn down in spite of the court hearing. They took it down because of the court hearing. That building was alive at 7:40 Monday night with 4 more months of daylight scheduled, and the only reason it died at 8:15 Tuesday morning is that a judge was going to protect it at 9. It also explains the excavator, which had been bothering me professionally for weeks. If you want the timber, you don't drop the ring with a machine. You take the roof off, brace the hoop, and pick the frame apart over 3 days, and you get 36 clean beams instead of 19. They knew that. Their broker certainly knew that. They wrecked half their own merchandise, deliberately, and ate the loss, because the merchandise was worth less to them than the clock. That is what intent looks like when it shows up in a spreadsheet. Bobby read that email and thought, good, that solves it. She never once considered that she had just put the word in writing. The damages hearing was in February, and I had prepared myself for something dry. What I got was a man named Emil Krebs, who is one of 4 people in North America who still build circular timber frames, and who arrived at that courthouse thrilled. Nobody ever calls Emil. He had photographs. He had a model. He explained to the court with real pleasure that you cannot appraise a round barn by comparable sales because there are no comparables. The measure is reproduction, what it cost to build the thing again. And then he built it again, out loud for the room. It was the worst 40 minutes of my life, and he was having a wonderful time. 36 principal timbers, hand-hewn, and no, you cannot mill them. Milling is a different thing entirely, you'd see it, and then he explained why you'd see it. Circular sill assembly. Self-supporting roof, circular rafter system, no interior post, which requires engineered documentation now, because no code official in this state approves a 120-year-old idea on tradition alone. Silo core. Original profile siding, milled to order, and here he became briefly unhappy about a supplier. He kept saying how rare it was. He kept saying nobody does this anymore. He said you'd never get this back 4 times cheerfully, the way you'd tell someone their grandmother's ring was one of a kind. The association's lawyer, God help him, tried to cross-examine. He asked whether a simpler barn wouldn't serve the same function. Emil lit up like a Christmas tree and took another 11 minutes. The number was enormous. A woman in the 3rd row put her hand over her mouth. And then my attorney stood and offered his second exhibit, which was 3 pages, stapled, on association letterhead with a round barn in green ink across the top. The minutes. With the roll call, here's the thing Bobby never understood, and it's the only part of this I find funny. She thought the vote was her shield. The vote was the evidence. Corporate personhood does not protect the individual who personally commits or directs a tort. You don't get to hide behind an entity for a thing you did with your own hands and your own hand raised. And the insurance she'd promised everybody was a fantasy in 2 directions. The directors and officers policy excludes intentional acts. The general liability policy excludes intentional acts and wouldn't have covered this anyway. And both carriers denied within a month of each other. 2-page letters, 9 names on each tender, 9 denials. She'd spent 30 years making certain other people's risk landed somewhere else. Then she personally created the largest uninsured personal liability in the history of that county and hand-delivered a typed list of its owners to the plaintiff, unprompted, in a stamped envelope, because she wanted me to see the count. 9 in favor, none opposed. 9 defendants with their names beside the check marks. She said it, finally. But we voted as a board. Her own lawyer had to explain, in front of everyone, that a board is not a person, and a checkmark is not a fingerprint you can wipe off. And I sat there thinking about her telling me she wasn't asking, she was informing. She'd informed me, she'd informed the county in writing by signing for their letter. She'd informed the state by not filing. She'd informed the court by demolishing on the morning of the hearing. That woman never asked anybody anything in her life, and now every single thing she'd ever informed anyone of was in a binder with a tab on it. Dale Wickham testified. Retired, 4th house from the entrance, the man who'd studied the carpet. He said he voted yes for one reason. The president told the room the association was insured, and no individual was taking on any exposure at all. 6 of the other 7 said the same thing under oath. 2 have since sued her personally. Dale wouldn't look at her. Dale had known her 8 years. That's what she actually lost, not the money. She'll lose that too, and probably the house. She'd been the woman who kept everybody safe, and she got 8 neighbors to sign their names to their own ruin over coffee. The county attorney looked at criminal mischief for a while and passed, the way they do when the paper is complicated and the civil case is already eating the defendants alive. The federal side went its own way, slowly. The pile came out in April, in bags, on a manifest, at their expense, and in June the county granted my application. Round barn, circa 1903, designated a local historic landmark, posthumously. There's a plaque now, on a post, beside a foundation ring with nothing on it. That's the meanest sentence in this business, and it's also just how paperwork works. The protection arrived 4 months after the thing it protected. I don't have the heart to take it down. They renamed the subdivision, by the way. Nobody made them. There's no law against naming your neighborhood after a building you knocked over, but the case caption was going to be in the local paper for 2 years, and Round Barn Farms Homeowners Association looked, in the words of their new attorney, unhelpful. So they voted. 9-0, I assume. I don't get their minutes anymore. It's Demel Creek Estates now. I drove out the day the crew came for the entrance monument. They cut it off at the base, wrapped it in a moving blanket, and forklifted my barn silhouette into the back of a truck. I had one thing in my own truck that day, Beam 23. I bought it back from the dealer in Ohio at $400 a foot, 11 feet, $4,400 cash, which is the most expensive purchase of my life and the only thing I own that I paid for twice. It stands upright on the old foundation ring now, socketed where it stood for 121 years, one of 36. My wife says it looks like a grave marker, and she's not wrong, but it isn't for looking at. Every so often I walk out and put my thumb in a chisel mark a man made while he was numbering his own work, and I think about how he cut it flat on the ground because he knew a circle can't stand until every piece of it is holding up every other piece. Then I go back in the house, look at the artifact, 3 pages, stapled, letterhead, roll call in a table. 9 in favor, none opposed. Bobby Halloran mailed that to Owen Sarkis herself, on purpose, as a flex. And what she actually mailed was a signed, dated, itemized list of 9 defendants. 30 years in risk management taught her that a properly minuted vote is armor. It isn't. It's a fingerprint card. Corporate personhood doesn't cover what you personally directed, and no policy on earth covers intentional acts, which is a sentence she could have recited in her sleep about somebody else's company. Read the rest of that paper the same way. It's dated 3 weeks after the salvage contract, which turns the vote into theater. The barn came down 90 minutes before a hearing that would have saved it. Her own lawyer wrote, if the structure is already gone, there's nothing to restrain. And lawyers' emails come out in discovery. They wrecked half the timber they'd sold rather than miss the clock, which is intent you can see in a spreadsheet. The dry demolition turned a roof that was legal at rest into a federal violation and dusted the exact playground the vote was meant to protect. And a Roman numeral chiseled in 1903 by a man keeping track of his own work priced the whole thing out. $2,400 a foot on a rack in Ohio. So, a board resolution is a wish with a staple in it. An association has no authority over land it doesn't own, and a pending landmark application is a real moratorium. But a moratorium is a prohibition, not a bodyguard, and only an order with a judge's name on it moves at the speed of a machine. Ask who profits before you believe the safety argument. Which brings me to it. Owen did everything right, in the correct order, faster than most lawyers would have. His barn is gone forever, and 9 families are ruined. So, did he win? Tell me below. I've been going back and forth on it all week.